Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast that dives headfirst into the proverbial deep end of our favorite spacefaring franchise on the road to Season 2 of its latest entry, Star Trek Discovery. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined, as usual, by members of our bold panel of Star Trek franchise explorers, including Rachael Clow.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Zaki Hasan.
Greetings.
And Cicero Holmes.
Cicero Holmes has far too much ego and not enough wisdom.
Good pull. Good pull. Well, in this episode, we are continuing our look at our panel's choices for all-time favorite Star Trek episodes. And this week's selection comes from our distinguished biology PhD candidate, Rachael. Her choice, the timeless episode of Star Trek The Next Generation from Season 6, Tapestry, a deep look into both the past and mind of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. But first, as always, before we get into our regular discussions, how have you guys been doing and engaging with Star Trek, if at all, since we last got together? Cicero, my friend, start us off.
You know, so the funny thing is, peek behind the curtains, I just got myself my very first gaming laptop, and actually really my first really true 21st century gaming PC. So what did I do with that gaming PC but play Space Quest, the original from Sierra Games? It has nothing to do with Star Trek except for that it's in space. So I haven't, but I've thought about now that I have a VR ready computer, getting myself an Oculus Rift and downloading Bridge Crew on the PC so I could enjoy it in its full VR glory. So that may be something that I'm doing very quickly. But in terms of active Trek, what I have been doing is continuing my listen of the latest book in the Discovery series, Fear Itself.
Excellent. And without getting into too many specifics, how is it striking you so far?
It is striking me. It is a book, and I am listening to it, and it is very well narrated, and it has it's featuring the person who is very quickly becoming one of my favorite characters in all of the Star Trek universe, Saru. So I am enjoying it from that perspective alone.
Excellent. Rachael, you're actually reading the book.
Oh, I'm done, Chris.
You're done.
Oh, hey now.
You have finished the book.
Finished the book.
So without specifics then, kind of piggybacking off of that, you got any loose thoughts you'd like to share?
I really liked it. I was very engaged with it this weekend.
Interesting.
So,
because I remember when you started it, you weren't exactly super into it, but
yeah, because I wanted to read another book more.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah,
okay.
I felt like I had to read this book, which is just never a good plan for having a good reading experience. So when I actually wanted to read this book, I really enjoyed it.
And you went along for the ride.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, and we do plan on talking about Fear Itself on this show, but it's a relatively fair distance off from now, which helps. So, and apologies too if you do pick up any pops in the background. We're recording this the night before Independence Day in the United States, so people are already letting their fireworks loose, even though they're illegal in Cook County, Illinois. But hey, what are you going to do about it? Zaki, any engagement since last time? What do you got?
Yeah. Well, I after our last conversation and City on the Edge of Forever, I was moved to watch Yesteryear, which was the pilot or one of the early episodes of the Star Trek animated series, which also utilizes the Guardian of Forever. And so now I'm kind of like in dribs and drabs, just kind of watching the cartoon shows because I actually haven't seen those in a while.
Mm-hmm.
So just
It's been a while since I've watched Yesteryear. In your estimation, how does it match up just as far as like a follow, especially considering its series as a follow-up to City on the Edge of Forever?
You know, I think I'm generally a fan of the animated show, pretty much across the board. But I mean, obviously they had their hills and valleys. I think Yesteryear is, I think most people would agree, it's on the higher end in terms of the quality of those episodes, it's one of the better ones,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love, by the way, that very gradually because Roddenberry is very arbitrarily was like, oh, we're just gonna toss the cartoon from canon, but ever since for the last 20 years, they've gradually woven back in a lot of stuff that was introduced into the animated show into the live action canon. So the cartoon has sort of been backed into canon.
Yeah, and it only makes sense. I mean, it sends a kind of mixed signal about the state of the canon if something that actually did make it to broadcast is unincluded for no other reason than the fact that it differs a little bit in appearance from the other shows.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, you got D.C. Fontana and Samuel Peoples, and the entire cast just about was involved. Like, why wouldn't you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing in the animated show that's any worse than some of the worst episodes of the third season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember reading in George Takei's autobiography way back when that they actually weren't inclined to include either him nor Walter Koenig, but it was and Nichelle Nichols, yes, and it was Leonard Nimoy who stepped up and got at least those two included. Koenig obviously wasn't a cast member, but he would end up writing one of the episodes. I think the Infinite Vulcan is the one that he wrote,
like the worst one.
But I mean, hey, at least he was kind of in the fold,
Yeah.
Shows
coincidence? I think not.
Shows the long arm of Leonard Nimoy. But
that's right.
You ever go to a convention with Walter Koenig? It's fun to hear him talk because he kind of does write he has an entire script in his head planned out about why Khan remembers him in Space Seed, even though Chekhov wasn't in Space Seed, which is pretty hilarious.
How funny.
Yeah, but he's a fun guy to hear talk. Rachel, besides finishing Fear itself, what have you been up to in Star Trek?
You tell me, Chris, because I don't remember I was doing anything else.
We did something today.
We watched TNG.
We did watch TNG, yes. I guess I'll take it from here. Yeah. We watched season 2 of The Next Generation, the episode Q Who, which I think the last time that you and I had sat down to watch it was in a movie theater. Because that was one of the episodes. I think it was Q Who and Measure of a Man that were paired together in a theatrical exhibition right around the time that the Blu-rays were coming out, which was pretty cool. Both good solid episodes of season 2, but Q Who, coming off of a rewatch of Tapestry, I think we wanted to get a little bit more Q, just to get a feel for him before we sit down and talk about him tonight. But always good to check in with one of the absolute best series in Star Trek. But we do have a fair amount of news to talk about before we actually move on to our episode discussion. So, as per usual, let's do that first. So first up, we have a couple of items related to the reason that this show got together in the first place, which is Star Trek Discovery. James Duff, who's the co-creator of a TNT police drama called The Closer, which I believe starred Kira Sedgwick, he has been brought into the fold of Star Trek Discovery as an executive producer to assist Alex Kurtzman in his new role as the series' sole showrunner. Kurtzman could most definitely use the help since he's been charged with expanding Trek's TV presence, and it seems like Duff has a demonstrated love of the Star Trek franchise. He appeared in the wonderful 2016 documentary For the Love of Spock that was directed by Adam Nimoy in tribute to his father. And he also has a credit in the franchise for writing an early season 1 episode of Enterprise called Fortunate Son, which brought the Nausicaans into the 22nd century. I have never seen The Closer. I have seen Fortunate Son. I thought it was a fine episode, and it's pretty emblematic of season 1 of Enterprise. But I don't know. Does this strike you guys in any particular way? It doesn't seem like there's a significant amount of meat here, but Kurtzman probably would be spreading himself too thin. Zaki, do you have any thoughts on how this could affect season 2?
I would say I'm neutral on it. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I mean, Fortunate Son is like you said, it's like it's like a okay first. That's a Travis episode, isn't it? So that's like, I mean, my memory of that episode is just like when Travis is like yelling at the guy, and he's like, "The hell with you," and he says it in this really funny way. And like to this day, 15, 16 years later, my buddy who I used to watch Enterprise with, whenever I'm mad at him, I'll be like, "Listen, the hell with you." So that has nothing to do with anything. But I if he's a fan, I'm sure it's fine, you know.
Yeah, sure. With nothing, of course, but love and respect for Anthony Montgomery. He definitely would grow into the role of Travis.
I love Travis, just to be clear. You guys know how much I love Enterprise. This is good-natured ribbing. I'd like.
Yes, of course. Comes from a place of love. But yeah, Cicero, have you ever seen The Closer?
No, I haven't actually.
Me neither. I don't know anybody that.
I think The Closer had Glenn Close in it, not Kira Sedgwick.
No. The Closer was Glenn Close. You're thinking of Damages. That was Glenn Close.
Oh, okay.
Kira Sedgwick was the closer.
She was the closer, and then she left the show, and it became Major Crimes.
I didn't watch that either.
Yeah, I know, but clearly people do because these shows just go on forever.
Yeah, they do.
Well,
world out here of
if I had to guess, I think that's why he was hired, because he's a veteran and he's overseen long-running TV shows, right. And Kurtzman's experience on TV probably doesn't really compare to Mr. Duff, so hopefully that will translate into smooth sailing for the rest of Discovery Season 2.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is on the heels of the last bit of news that we released the last time we got together, they need to bring in someone who has some experience making broadcast television, or at least broadcast style television. Yes. And while they clearly want to break the mold or be in the tradition of some of the newer shows that are out there and about, they still want to make sure that they have someone out there or someone within the fold that understands how, in quotes, television works.
Yeah, totally. Right? It's a stability update, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So go out there, get yourself a veteran who understands things, and the two of you can make beautiful music together.
Wonderfully said. Next up, Discovery has announced that it will have a Hall H presentation at this year's Comic-Con International in San Diego, which will be taking place on July 20th. And cast members included are Sonequa Martin Green, Doug Jones, Shazad Latif, Mary Wiseman, Anthony Rapp, Wilson Cruz, Mary Chieffo, and Anson Mount, along with executive producers Alex Kurtzman and Heather Caden. And it will be moderated by series guest star and comedian Tig Notaro, who's going to be playing Chief Engineer Reno from a different starship in Season 2. So it's not going to be Discovery. Nice. It's not going to be the Enterprise. It's they've named the ship. The name escapes me at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see her, because Rachel and I have taken in her stand-up in the past. And I think she spoke recently about learning the particular technobabble lines on a show like Star Trek. So it'll be interesting to see how that stuff shakes out. As for the panel itself, last year it didn't seem like anything particularly revelatory came from the panel other than the cast kind of introducing themselves to fandom. So this year, hopefully we'll get some juicy information that usually comes out of Hall H.
Maybe Javeed Iqbal will show up finally.
Right. Yes. We're still waiting on that.
His belated arrival.
Hey, that would definitely be a Comic-Con worthy surprise. I mean,
people would talk.
Right. Look, I know, I know that this is like a goofy fanboy wish, but I really hope that someone like Zach Quinto is just waiting in the wings to be introduced as a cast member in Season 2. There are few things that I would want more. That's what I want for Christmas is Zachary Quinto to appear at Comic-Con to announce that he's reprising his role as Spock on Discovery.
That would be awesome.
I mean, the presence of the Enterprise with Comic-Con coming up, you combine both of those things. Hopefully that leads to some kind of revelation, but I'm not holding my breath either.
Were you excited by that, Chris? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So if there is one thing that I love about you, Chris, and the list is very, very long of things that I love about you, it is your ability to hold everlasting hope. You are the Superman that we all deserve. So now the Zachary. So where I thought you were going to go with this was not Zachary Quinto, but that Jason Isaacs was going to come out and talk about, how Prime Lorca is somewhere in the mirror.
That's number 2 on the wish list. Number 3 is Shazad Latif with a scar saying that he's Javidic Ball.
Funny mustache.
The Groucho glasses.
Yes. But if Quinto were to come out at any point, it would be at Comic-Con.
I would think so.
Like, that's the place. That's the place to do it. But what if like, I am in complete agreement with you guys about if they're going to bring Spock, like Spock's got to be on the show now, right? If Spock is going to be on the show, it has to be Quinto. And if it's not Quinto, I think everyone will be disappointed. Unfortunately, to whoever the actor's dismay it is, if it's not Quinto. But what an effing shock, holy hell moment it would be if Michael Burnham goes to Spock's quarters and and Spock says enter, and it's Quinto on the screen, and that's the first time you see it.
That would be a hell of a moment. I can't dispute that. Not at all.
So
I'd have to film that. So
right. Like, I mean, I would hear him. We live about 30 miles apart. I would hear him scream from here.
Well, we do know that Spock will be appearing in season 2 in flashback form as a child. That I'm reasonably sure has actually been confirmed. So Spock's going to be on the show, but you're going to go on the Enterprise. You're going to show us Captain Pike. We still haven't heard anything. That actually makes more sense now that I think about it. We haven't heard anything in regards to other characters from the Cage being cast for Discovery season 2. If they announce someone as number 1, if they announce someone as Yeoman Colt, the names that don't really mean much to people outside of Star Trek or Star Trek fandom, still might be Hall H worthy, though.
Spock's gonna be hurt or unconscious or missing or something.
He's good, like those episodes.
It's just gonna be Pike alone on the Enterprise.
like those season 1 episodes of Supergirl where you just see Superman's boots in the shot.
Yes,
and everyone else is looking at his face. Yeah. Oh God.
He's standing over you, but his face is glared out by the sun.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well.
So I think that the bigger news of this piece of news is that Wilson Cruz has been included on the
I mean they haven't been coy about him still being around, but it's hard. I don't know, Cicero. I can't really imagine a way in which they bring him back, but I can't say that I'm not happy that he's there. But how does that strike you?
He is going to play the role of Ghost of Mycelio Network's past.
They're already setting up the Christmas episode. That's
right. Exactly.
He visits Prime Lorca.
He's just bringing back relaying stories from Prime Lorca.
Wonderful.
But I mean, I guess, well, clearly Stamets' relationship with Cruz's character was an important one to him. And I think that we've already seen him play this kind of id/ego version of himself in Stamets' mind.
Yes.
And maybe we'll start to see more of that. And I think what happened was that people gravitated towards that relationship and towards those two actors in a way that people, I think that the showrunners weren't necessarily expecting, or maybe they were hoping.
Sure.
And when it grew, when it came to fruition and people really took to those guys, they realized that they had to bring Cruise back in a real way. And to be honest, now that I think about it, I don't know if there's really been a Puerto Rican or a Caribbean Latino on Star Trek that, had a starring role on Star Trek. Obviously, we on Voyager, oh crap, why can't I think of names? I can't think of names now. Chakotay is he's of Latin descent, or Hispanic descent, but Wilson Cruz is the first out and out Caribbean Latino that's had a recurring role on a Star
That's
Trek
true,
series.
but I think another part of it too is just the fact that relationship and that romance actually had a degree of reality to it that not a lot of other TV romances have. I mean, they didn't make it overly cheesy. You saw them in something as mundane as just brushing. Granted, the scene where they're brushing their teeth turned into something kind of extreme from a sci-fi perspective pretty quickly. But Zaki, if memory serves, you were about as disappointed as I was when Culber's neck was broken by Vogue. Yeah. How do you see this playing out? If you had to put your TV extrapolation prediction hat on, and how do you feel about it?
If I were to guess, they're going to find some mycelial network way of making him a presence in the show. If I can't imagine he's going to be flesh and blood, at least right away. Maybe down the line,
Sure.
But I don't think they're going to just casually fridge the first open gay couple on Star Trek and just leave it that way. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that what's his name? See, now I'm having trouble with names. The guy, that guy, Stamets, the actor. What's his name?
Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony. I don't think he would have ever. He would have not been okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly. Well, either way, we'll be very interested to see what comes out of Hall H on the 20th. Another quick note, if you are a Star Trek fan and you are going to attend the San Diego Comic-Con, the Michael J. Wolff Fine Arts Gallery, which is at 363 Fifth Avenue in San Diego, will be housing a Star Trek Discovery Mirror Universe experience that has props and costumes from the Mirror Universe episodes of Discovery, including Emperor Georgiou's throne, and also exclusive merchandise that you can buy there.
Now, are the workers from the Mirror Universe, do they just slap you?
They shove ganglia down your throat? Yeah, who knows? You get the real Mirror Universe experience.
So Zaki, are you going to line up right after
you jumped in right before I was gonna be like, hey, sounds like the place I want to be. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me of something. I'm sorry, I had to find an excuse.
Let's hope that's an exhibit.
Yeah, really. Keen-eared listeners will notice too that the Zaki's Agony booth music made it into the video game episode that I put together. So hopefully I had some fun with that. Something else worth mentioning: Star Trek Discovery received some notable honors at this year's Saturn Awards. It won the show at large won the award for Best New Media Television Series, which is basically a streaming series. And Sonequa Martin Green walked away with Best Actress for her role as Michael Burnham on the show, beating out Gillian Anderson for The X-Files, Katerina, I'm not even sure, Catriona Boff for Outlander, Melissa Benoist for Supergirl, Lena Headey for Game of Thrones, Adrian Palicki for The Orville, Sarah Paulson for American Horror Story, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead for Fargo. that's some pretty stiff competition. And Sonequa Martin Green and Michael Burnham walked away with it. Any thoughts about Discovery taking these honors home against that stiff competition? Rachel, you're a TV watcher.
Some stiff and some not so stiff competition, I would say. That's well deserved. I think she's the best of the bunch.
Even more than Cersei Lannister
this season, yeah.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Maybe, not earlier seasons.
And your beloved Scully.
Well, all right. The most recent X-Files season sucked, Chris.
Scully's not even a fan of the last season of X-Files.
She knew it. Yeah. She didn't show up for the awards ceremony and be disappointed. She knew what was going down.
Yeah. Hey, those checks cleared, so that's all she cares about.
Well, she's got to support her kids.
So the only shows of this that I've watched are Discovery, obviously, Supergirl, Game of Thrones, and The Orville. And I think that I'm just biased because I absolutely believe that Sonequa Martin Green, I mean, really, pound for pound, she probably did give the most emotionally compelling performance. I'm trying to put my biases aside. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of it, but Zaki, what do you think about this? Sonequa Martin Green walking away with Best Actress as Michael Burnham.
Well, I hope, if nothing else, that it drives some more eyeballs towards Discovery. I mean, Discovery is doing fine, but I mean, I hope that the faction of Trek faithful who've been like they found every reason under the sun to not watch the show. I hope they sort of start recognizing that, hey, this is something special that's at least worth a look,
Yeah, absolutely. Cicero?
Yeah, I mean, of the group that's there, similar to you, Chris, those are the shows that I currently watch. I've heard really great things about Fargo. Mm-hmm. I dip in and out of American Horror Story, but Lena Headey's been around for a while, so the kind of performance that she's going to give. Yeah. Melissa Benoist, I always say her name wrong. Is also someone that's been around for a while.
Yeah, she's oddly enough a veteran in this group.
Right. And while I love her performance as Kara Danvers and as Supergirl, I think they don't give her a lot to work with. In very many episodes. And Sonequa was given a lot to work with.
Yeah.
And she kicked ass the entire way. She held her own the entire way. And I think that was well deserved, well earned and well deserved. And good for them for giving her the type of recognition that she deserves and to give Discovery the type of recognition that it deserves.
Well, and this is something that, and agreed on all points. This is something that I often get frustrated about when people dismiss Star Trek, and specifically when they dismiss, like in the past, I've associated this more with Leonard Nimoy, but now I think it's equally applied to Sonequa Martin Green. In fact, it might be even more difficult for her because she goes from, being raised in the Vulcan lifestyle to readjusting to her humanity. So there's an element of emotional stunting that happens that she kind of imposes on herself. But then she's faced with these impossible situations. Like the thing that still comes to my mind is her killing Danby Connor in the turbo lift in the first Mirror Universe episode where she's on the Shenzhou. And everything that she has to do, that cannot be easy for an actor to pull off. So, as far as I'm concerned, the right person won here. But let's move along to the allegedly developing projects on the big and small screen. So first up, Zachary Quinto, the aforementioned incumbent Spock in the films of the Kelvin timeline, recently shared his perspective on the development of 2 Trek film projects. On an MTV podcast called Happy, Sad, Confused, he shared that in addition to the 4th Kelvin timeline film developing with director S.J. Clarkson attached, he believes that the Tarantino project, whatever it's going to end up being, will also include the 2009 cast. I'm not really sure what's fueling that perception. He was a little cagey on the reasoning that he gave. He also added that he had recently had dinner with S.J. Clarkson, and he relayed a lot of confidence in her ability since they have a shared working experience on NBC's Heroes from way back when. And he also talked about his philosophy about Spock and basically boiled it down to still loving the character. But briefly, what do you guys think? Should the Tarantino movie be this sort of franchise-wide tour de force that mashes together multiple casts, including the Kelvin characters? Or do you think it should be something simpler? Zaki, what's your conception of where this could go, considering these sort of disparate details that we seem to know about it right now?
I think that it should be rooted in the current cast, the original. The Kelvin cast. I don't. And my sense is not that Tarantino wants to come in and just be like, hey, like, let's just clear the deck and start over. I think my sense, and I could be totally off base here, is he wants to work with wherever they're at right now. Mm-hmm. And following up on what you were saying, I don't think Quinto would be saying as such unless he had a sense of what Tarantino's idea was. I don't think he'd just be like, oh yeah, and we're going to be involved in it. I don't think unless he had a sense like, yeah, that's where they're headed,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like out of all the current cast members, he would be the one most likely to actually know something.
Correct.
Even more than Chris Pine. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Rachel, what do you think?
I think that the Tarantino project is a bunch of bullshit that's never going to happen. And he's being cagey because he has zero information. And he's just like, yeah, sure.
Fair enough. Well, we'll see what happens. Yeah. Cicero, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it should have the Kelvin cast. I think it should have the original cast. I think it should have the Orville's cast. I think the snozberries should taste like snozberries. Hashtag Rachel is right. It is, bovine scatology.
You're mashing everything together here.
Yes.
Wow.
Because like, I will be shocked if this project ever sees the light of day. Mm-hmm. There's just so much going on. There's so many things that are happening right now. If Tarantino is stuck doing this the same way, and I'm going to pull this out of left field, the same way that Gene Hackman was building his house in Unforgiven. Like, it is just a project that will never be completed. And like, on his deathbed, I feel like Tarantino will be sitting there saying, but I'm writing the next Star Trek film.
I don't deserve this. I'm writing.
Right.
Deserves got nothing to do with
it. Right. Yeah, it's just, you'll be able to knock me over with a feather if this film actually winds up, making it to production.
Yeah,
so.
I would honestly be surprised too. It just seems like there's no real logic to anything. Not that there necessarily has to be for the public at this stage, but it just seems unlikely, and I'll leave it at that. A couple of other minor things that I wanted to get to. There's a rumor that has cropped up recently that I caught wind of via Trek Movie, that they caught wind of through a report at the UK's Mirror, which cited an unnamed Los Angeles source that said, quote, Patrick is looking pretty good to get back on board the Enterprise. There are some aspects of the deal to be finalized, but there is a verbal commitment from all parties. So hopefully that means that we are one step closer to the return of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Not really a whole lot to go off of, but I'm just going to try and add my good juju to the mix and hope that that maybe that's something that they're saving for Comic-Con too, because really that would be something that I think would bring the house down in Hall H. As someone who has been in Hall H a couple of times, I'm reasonably confident that an announcement concerning Captain Picard would might crack the roof at Hall H, if I were to guess.
Way to go out on a limb there, Chris.
Yeah, it's a real risky one. Right. Yeah, give me 41 odds on that.
They're just gonna be silent.
That's what they would do.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Patrick Stewart.
That's what they would do in Japan, because it's the utmost sign of respect towards something. Yes. They would be totally silent. It's not how we do things. So it it would be very loud. One other final thing is that, as we mentioned in the new intro to last week's episode, obviously Harlan Ellison passed away. This is the first time we all have a chance to really say something about it. Obviously, he was a mind and a presence in science fiction at large that will not be duplicated again, at least not for a very, very long time. Do you guys have any words about Mr. Harlan Ellison?
I think that his work will live on for a long time to come, and obviously the fact that he was a cantankerous personality, let's just say, that's part of the legend as well. But above and beyond that, he was also extremely kind. I saw a post that Howard Weinstein put on Facebook of essentially he. Back in like the early part of the 80s, Howard Weinstein sent Harlan Ellison a copy of his first Star Trek novel. And he kind of wrote a letter saying, I know you have a cagey history with Star Trek, but I just wanted you to, you were an inspiration, and I wrote this book. And Harlan Ellison sent back a ridiculously kind letter, really just like this book will have a place of honor on my shelf, and I'm honored to be thought of as an inspiration for you. And you look at something like that and you're like, I felt privileged to be able to experience that communication sort of secondhand,
Mm-hmm.
And that says something, I think, about his character, notwithstanding the sort of ornery reputation that he had cultivated.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that it's reasonably fair to say that, he made some enemies, but I think most of his enemies were suits, not fellow sci-fi writers.
Yeah.
And
right.
I think that that says a lot about him. So very well said. Cicero, any thoughts on Mr. Ellison?
Ellison was cantankerous. He was ornery. He was opinionated. And, that's how you like your sci-fi writers, right? Yeah. Those are the guys that go out and they build the best stories because they don't agree with people. They don't, they don't play by everyone else's rules. That gives them the ability to make imaginative stories, imaginative and engaging stories that seem to come out of left field. And Ellison had done that for almost his entire 80 years on 80 plus years on Earth.
Yeah.
We are as human beings, especially those of us who enjoy sci-fi television and enjoy science fiction writing, have been greatly enhanced by him being on this planet, and we salute him.
Excellent. All right. Well, now that we've gotten the news section out of the way, it's time to talk about the reason that we are all here tonight. We are going to discuss Rachel's choice for all-time favorite Star Trek episode from season 6 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Tapestry. So one of the things that's going to define this series of episodes is that each panelist will be taking the lead in their respective discussion, since they chose the topic, and it'll also allow us to engage with the episode's material in the way that they find most important or relevant. So having said that, Rachel, take us away.
Finally.
Sorry.
God. I've been waiting for like a year for you to give me control of this podcast, Chris. No.
Ooh, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it. Okay. So I chose Tapestry.
Yes.
And I chose it because I think it is a great episode of TNG. I think that it has a really interesting life lesson for us all about how your mistakes make you who you are today, and how great people aren't just, born great. Like, they go through some crazy phases. So everybody that who is your role model and who you look up to wasn't always like that. They had a past that made them who they are. and it has Q in it, which is, I mean, John DeLancey makes every episode better. And it's just a good character episode. So to start out, I just wondering what your overall impression of the episode are. What your overall impressions of the episode are. So let's start with Cicero.
So, you know what was great is, first off, thanks, Rachel, for picking this episode, is that I have zero memory of watching this episode. So it was literally like watching it for the very first time.
Nice.
And so I mean, that was great. And the fact that I'm sure I've watched it before, but again, it had been at conservatively a half a lifetime ago, almost literally, if and when I had seen it. So I was watching it with virgin eyes, essentially, and it did exactly what you were saying, is show us that the people that we look to as being great don't always start that way. They start out as, during the course of their lives, as they're building the tapestry that is their life. They're flawed individuals that make mistakes and do things. They are fallible. It's kind of like looking at your parents, right? You think of your folks as always being like, them only as parents, and you only know them as adults. But as you grow older and as you mature and you start to learn more about them as individuals, you start to understand what got them to becoming the people that they are, as opposed to just mom and dad. And and in a lot of ways, Captain Picard is our Star Trek dad, and we got to see Captain Picard before he had kids.
Yeah, definitely. Picard is he's our TV dad. So that's what we're learning about his past. How about you, Zaki? What did you think?
I remember watching this episode first run when it aired, and I loved the fact that back in 93, pre-internet and all that, like, you could truly be surprised by everything that unfolds. So I remember at the end of the teaser when Q shows up, it's like, oh, it's Q, and just the pleasant, like, when I revisited for this, I remembered that. I remember being like, I remember that feeling of surprise at, how old was I? I was 13, I think. And what I've come to appreciate in the 25 years since this aired, first of all, the fact that it's now 25 years old, like, holy crap, and I now that I have a few years under my belt, I can appreciate the message of the episode, right? Which is this idea of living with regret, right? And regret is something that makes us who we are if we hone it the right way, right? And the episode title is so illustrative, and they allude to it in the thing. What thread will you pull? What would you change in your life that would make you into something different than you are right now, right? If you look at somebody like Captain Picard, like, what hasn't he achieved in his life, right? And that horrible thing that happened with the Nausicaans, that's part of that. And, for me at a very young age, I internalized that lesson, and I've tried to carry that with me even now, where regret is not something you should carry with you. It is something you should learn from and make you a better person, and so that's, to me, what makes Captain Picard a different person than Captain Kirk. Like, this is why Captain Picard is the way he is. People call him stodgy and whatever, like all the
Mm-hmm.
the cliche, but look at the wisdom that he's learned. He did the Captain Kirk thing.
Yeah.
And that's what made him a better person. Like, it's the maturity of being in your 40s as opposed to your 30s,
Yeah, for sure. I like the idea that you look back on your past and you're thinking like, oh, I would do this so much differently. But like if you got put in your younger self's body, like you would totally weird out all of your friends and just like you'd be like this like weird old person.
You'd be like, Donald Trump is president. Seriously, I'm not kidding.
You gotta stop it.
I suppose Jane Wyman is the first lady.
Yeah. All right. So, Chris, what are your impressions of the episode?
Well, everybody has illustrated it beautifully. I think one of the conceptual things that strikes me about it largely is that, first of all, Tapestry is one of those really brilliant uses of retroactive continuity that completely manages to change your perspective on every other time that you saw this character. And what I mean by that is that, yes, as Zaki alluded to, Captain Picard is obviously and often accused of being, stiff and perhaps too ambassadorial, as if that's a thing, and very, very, very cautious. But when you insert the events of Tapestry and what we learn about his early life, it automatically creates, even going back to season 1, a rather fascinating arc of development that he went on. He basically developed from Kirk into Picard. Like he had a lot more in common with James T. Kirk at the end of his life by being that kind of reckless person who's willing to start a fight with an alien twice his size and becoming the guy who Starfleet trusts with first contact missions and taking the cautious approach and being counted on not to rush into something bullheaded. And it just also turns him retroactively into way more of a badass than we've ever seen before. And people who don't think Captain Picard has that kind of veracity running through his veins have probably never seen Tapestry. So out of everything that I love about this episode, just as far as its structure, the story that it tells, I think that's what I take away from it the most, is the service that it gives to the journey of Jean-Luc Picard's life, from young man to captain of the Enterprise.
Do you think that has something to do with Gene Roddenberry and the fact that he kind of, like, I mean, I remember hearing that, like, Jean-Luc Picard was, like, how Gene Roddenberry conceived of himself as an older man, whereas, like, Captain Kirk and Riker are, like, like, adult Gene Roddenberry, and Wesley Crusher is
child
Gene Roddenberry, which is a little bit thinking a lot of himself. But
that's
honestly,
true though, because Roddenberry's middle name was Wesley.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I don't know. I remember hearing somebody say that they thought that, but I don't know. I can't source it.
No, I could see that. It speaks to the very different kind of philosophy that exists for TNG pre-Roddenberry and post-Roddenberry, if that makes sense. Because I don't know if this episode could have existed under Roddenberry's guidance.
I think you're right.
So, in that respect,
Roddenberry would have been like, "We need more women kissing each other in the background."
But I'm definitely Captain Picard. I'm so wise.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I don't know. We kind of got to episode or to my second question.
Can I add to what Chris was saying?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I think that what we got in Captain Picard is, I think, echoing what you're saying. He's a representation of what Star Trek had become, certainly by that stage in the franchise's history, and also in Roddenberry's life. Star Trek had become a lifestyle, right? And so, and Captain Picard was Roddenberry's ideal of the perfected man. And he's not somebody who has, Ira Bear had the famous story about the I want to say it was the Captain's Holiday episode where he wanted Picard to have doubt and regret and all this stuff, and Roddenberry was like, no way, he doesn't have doubts and regrets. But what I find so fascinating is, as much as I love the character, his most interesting moments are when that veneer breaks. In Family, when he just starts crying. It's poignant and beautiful and shocking because we just don't expect that from him. And I think in that same way, Tapestry works, because it's the perfected man who's saying, I'm unhappy. I'm carrying this sore, this wound, metaphorical wound and literal, over all the things I wish I had done. And I think for us as viewers, since none of us consider ourselves perfected, it's reassuring to know that, look, we can get there. Right. Being Captain Picard is something we can achieve, but the same way he has to deal with this stuff, well, we have to deal with that stuff too. It's all about how we choose to process it.
Yeah. So Cicero, this was effectively your first time viewing this episode that you can remember. Did it change your perception of Picard as his character?
It definitely, as Zaki and Chris kind of alluded to, it deepened my appreciation for him. So I guess in a way it definitely did. It didn't, so it didn't change my perception of him. It did deepen my appreciation for him. But like, as I'm watching young, brash Kirkian, if that's a word, Picard, work his way around the Nausicaans and then, get literally stabbed in the back by the fact that his friends are inept at fighting.
Cover the flank, man. Come on.
Right.
Got to take those Kirk Fu extension courses.
Right. Yes. So like it made me, as I'm watching it and I'm seeing how just cavalier he was about everything, I said, of course that's who he is, right? Of course that's who he was. As I'm sitting there and enjoying the journey, as I'm eating popcorn, watching all of this, because he can't, like, you can't revert to the mean if the Picard of if Captain Picard is the mean, you can't revert to that. You can't be as professorial, you can't be as introspective as Picard is without having the wisdom and experience of making those mistakes, of having those flaws, of being that flawed individual. Because it comes from nothing. It would be empty if he wasn't that person beforehand, and everyone would be able to see through that, and no one would trust his trustworthiness as a commander, as a leader of people, and a leader of civilization, basically, would basically be paper thin, had it not been for the fact that he had gone through these things and been able to advise people in different ways.
Yeah, good point. So at the end of the episode, I thought it was really interesting how Picard was talking to Riker and saying that he wasn't sure if his experience was a dream or a hallucination, or if Q was really, with him in the afterlife, playing tricks on him. So I'm curious what you guys think about do you think it was a hallucination? Do you think it was Q? It kind of seems like something Q would do. And in general, what do you think about episodes that occur in the mind of one character, or that are dream episodes that, don't really affect the world? Are they good, bad? What do you think, Chris?
In terms of whether or not it actually happened, the stance of spirituality in Star Trek, it's kind of all over the place. There's no real definitive statement, and nor should there be, on whether or not there is an afterlife or not. It could take forms. It can be some kind of alien intervention. But there's a lot of Star Trek that kind of runs with the idea that the way that religions characterize the afterlife is more rooted in mythology than actuality. So is Q the actual being that's sort of there on the cusp of death into what is next? He can be if he wants to be. He's one of the only beings in the Star Trek universe who is powerful enough and who can control enough just by sheer force of will, given what he is, that he could probably choose for any person in the universe to have an afterlife, even if most people don't. So it makes sense to me that because of Q's affinity for Captain Picard, the closest thing he has to a friend in the entire universe, that he would give Picard an afterlife because he thinks he deserves it. As much crap as Q gives Jean-Luc Picard, in his own way, he kind of loves him. So, as for do I think it actually happened? Yeah, I think Q did it because of exactly that fact. He loves Picard.
Yeah. In the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard, Q really loved him at the end. They have some good times after the Enterprise.
Oh, that's good.
It's very nice.
It's good to know.
Yeah. So what do you think, Cicero?
So my personal feelings on it is, does it matter if Picard believes it happened, then it happened, right? And it's not like we're talking about a psychological break for a human, for a person, for a sentient being, where his break from reality negatively impacts his ability to do things, once that break is over. In fact, I think his break from reality, whether it was real or imagined, has probably improved his ability and has given him a level of perspective on his future endeavors as a result of everything that transpired. So whether it was Q, or whether he crossed over and his manifestation of the afterlife was Q, someone who in his mind and in reality, in quotes, is omnipotent. So who better to lead him into the afterlife, into life after death, than this manifestation in the form of Q. And again, those things, like, it really doesn't matter because it could have happened in the blink of an eye. Like his existence in the afterlife could have been in between them, charging oh crap, Zaki, you've given it to me again, the defibrillator. It could have been in between them getting ready to defib him, and just those moments, like maybe he lost consciousness for a fraction of a second, but in those fractions of a second were the 40 minutes that we witnessed, and that's all that matters.
Yeah. It's interesting that a couple of the best episodes of Star Trek TNG happen entirely within Jean-Luc Picard's mind.
I was about to say, yeah.
I don't know what that says about everyone else on the
that
show.
He's just so damn fascinating to watch.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what.
But no, I mean, but look at Inner Light. There's another example, right? It's a Picard who's broken down, who's vulnerable, who's I think that those are the most fascinating Picard episodes, is when that veneer crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Inner Light is another example of that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely.
So, Zaki, what do you think about dream episodes in general? Or
it's funny because Star Trek is replete with dream episodes, and the episode that I've picked for this series that we're doing certainly broadly speaking fits into that idea. And the episode Twilight from the third season of Enterprise, another one like that. And it's even if it's undone or rendered moot by the end, does that make the experience that we had any less profound? And I would say no. It's sort of I'm reminded of a quote by Alan Moore at that he wrote for he wrote what was pitched as the last Superman story, and
Twilight of the Superheroes.
No, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Actual public, yes, of course.
Right, and at the very beginning it says, "This is an imaginary story, aren't they all?"
Yeah,
and I always love that because it's more essentially it's saying, look, man, this like you can try to make it seem more real in your head and file it as quote unquote canon or whatever, but the experience you get out of it is what makes it real. And I think this episode, I like that they leave it vague as far as whether Q was actually there or just in his imagination. Like Chris, I'd like to believe that Q was there, that he would care enough to be Clarence, to Picard's Jimmy Stewart, but ultimately it doesn't matter, I think, but it doesn't make the episode any less poignant, It'd be funny if the next time we see Q, Picard's like, "Hey, remember that time you helped me?" And Q's like, "Pardon me."
It's like I'm gonna stop visiting you now. It's getting
You're dreaming about me. This is getting weird,
Right.
Like, what if Q is entirely imagined by Picard?
Oh, sure. He's like Harvey the Puka,
Yeah, and everyone just sort of plays along. And Riker's like, yeah, he offered me his powers too. Like, yeah. So one of the reasons that I like this episode is I feel like it is a valuable little parable about the nature of life and regret, and what makes a person a person. And I'm curious if there are any Trek episodes that have taught you guys valuable life lessons. How about you, Cicero?
I don't know how long you got. I mean, so it's. I mean, I think. So we started this entire endeavor talking about when we started Debrief, and you guys and Chris asked me what is it about Star Trek that makes me love the series and love the universe so much, and it's much like Chris Clow himself, as I said in this episode, it's the unbounding almost childlike belief and hope that we can if we can imagine ourselves to be better, and we can write stories about us being better as a species, then we can actually be and achieve that. And I think that was part of Roddenberry's dream, back in the 60s, and to be avant-garde in that way. But we got to see a lot of that realized by the time we got to TNG, because we were starting to get a group of people that had grown up and were inspired by that television show, and use that inspiration to affect positive change within the world we actually lived in. So by the time TNG came about, there were products that we were using, and there were inventions that were made that were directly linked to Star Trek. By the time Voyager was on the air, we had flip phones that were communicators. I mean, those were the Star Trek communicators. And there's, and of course, there's nobody that could sit back and tell me that the first person that decided that they were going to make a phone that, folded like a clamshell wasn't inspired by the Star Trek communicator.
Oh, they definitely were. That's documented.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, just from, I don't even want to get into the specifics of any particular episode, but just the show itself has shown us what we are capable of as a species if we trust and love each other and applaud and put forth science as something worthy of being praised and making the world smaller and loving each other as I ramble on. Yes.
That's heartwarming. Very good. Zaki, what are some episodes that have taught you valuable life lessons?
Well, Tapestry is definitely among those. I mean, gosh, there's so many, especially having gone through Next Generation with my kids, Who Watches the Watchers is a great example of, it's just what I've appreciated as I've gotten older. And again, as now being in a position where I'm sharing this with my children, it's look at these people we can aspire to be. Look at the goodness that they espouse, in a non-judgmental way. The Enterprise is not, racing through the galaxy, enforcing gunboat diplomacy. It's saying, let us learn about each other. We want to learn about you. Maybe you can learn something from us. And what a wonderful place it would be if we could do that, and I look at videos today of 4-year-old kids who are being told to defend themselves in court. And I just feel like, man, will we ever reach the Star Trek future? What river of do we have to crawl through?
The Trump presidency.
Yeah, basically. It's funny because in Encounter at Farpoint, there's a thing where they're taken to that court, and it's like we moved past this nonsense or whatever, and it's like, is that us right now?
There's an episode of Deep Space Nine where they go back and there's like ghettos of poor people that they go into. Yeah, the Gabriel Bell episodes. And I remember when I first watched them and I was like, oh man, like that's not gonna happen. And then I watched it again recently and I was like, okay. Yeah.
Star Trek
10 years from now. Okay.
Star Trek has always painted a rather bleak vision of the 21st century, and it's kind of eerie to me anyway to see how bleak things have kind of ended up. I mean, we're not quite to the Bell riots yet, but
doesn't it feel like we're one bad week away from that,
We're one bad week away from most of the major cities being destroyed with very few governments left and 600 million people dead after World War III with radioactive isotopes in the atmosphere.
On that note, catch you next time, everybody.
Right. Go boldly, my friend.
Major cities.
People are listening in their car, just gonna pull over and cry.
Look, they already know, okay? We're not telling people new information here.
Yeah, they live here.
Yeah. So, Chris, what are some Trek episodes that have taught you valuable life lessons?
If I had to nail some specifics down, I think one of the first ones that immediately jumps to mind is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield from the original series, because it does such an incredible job of characterizing racism as ridiculous and stupid. Is
that the one with the guys with the two?
Yeah, okay. Beale with Frank Gorshin.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
He is white on the right side.
Right.
And Spock and Kirk just look at each other like, is this guy for real? Right. That's such an arbitrary thing to make such a big deal about, but it ended up destroying that world. And that really resonated with me as a young person, just because, you need to put those kinds of things in the appropriate context and realize that, yeah, that's kind of a stupid thing to get in such heated states about. And especially considering what it can lead to and how it can lead you to dehumanizing the other, and which just can lead to atrocity. It's a long road to atrocity when you're able to say that person is less than me. So I think Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is one that immediately jumps to mind.
Yeah, I like that one because as a biologist, I have to point out that the differences that we hang so much value on are as stupid as like having the reverse colors, because humans as a species have ridiculously low genetic diversity, so we're all very similar to each other. And an alien looking at us would be like, what are you even talking about? You all look the same.
What's wrong with you? Right. Yeah. That's what they would be saying. No, totally agreed. Something else that comes to mind, and I feel like sometimes I don't get a chance, or I don't give myself a chance rather, to praise it enough, largely because it's often lauded as one of the greatest works that the franchise has ever produced, but Star Trek II. And I think one of the primary lessons that I take from Star Trek II is that age need not be a debilitating obstacle to both accomplishing goals and living a fulfilling life. It doesn't really matter how old you are as long as you're able to do the things that you need to do, because Star Trek II, in a total contrast to the motion picture, which I certainly have a lot of affection for, but it's one of those movies that helps me to see, and it really kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom, that you need to have a lead and you need to have a full cast with young, vibrant, beautiful people. And the whole movie was oriented around the idea that Jim Kirk feels like he's getting older, and he feels that his advancing in age is taking away from his efficacy. Even though you have Spock in the middle of the movie telling him it was a mistake for you to accept promotion because your first best destiny is the command of a starship. And he didn't say that he couldn't still command a starship. He said that that is what he is destined to be. Doesn't matter how old he is. And I kind of love, even though I despise Star Trek Generations for a lot of different reasons, that's a lesson that Kirk takes the opportunity to teach Captain Picard much later. So that's, they made that joke in the Simpsons.
Don't let them promote you. Don't let them transfer
Exactly.
you. Don't let them do anything that takes you off the bridge of that ship.
Because while you're there, you can make a difference. And
honestly, like, that exchange alone is why I can never completely hate that movie.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's not a movie.
But I mean, I love that Star Trek as a franchise, at least before, is something that it very easily throughout its history shows that you can have all different kinds of protagonists. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter what gender they are, doesn't matter how old they are. And Star Trek II really was the thing that made me comfortable from an early age with the idea of becoming an old man someday. If that makes sense.
Nice. No, it absolutely does.
Yeah. You should be more chill about your gray hair then.
You're right. I should be.
Yeah.
I should be.
It looks good.
Well, full disclosure, my dad had a white streak in his hair like Reed Richards on steroids when he was 16. And that's starting to creep into my hairline. And yeah, you're right. I'm probably too critical.
You should be thankful for the extra 14 years of dark hair that you've got.
You're a little older than 16, Chris. So.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Better to be a silver fox than a bald eagle.
Hey, well, there you go. Tangent time. I didn't start going gray until I was 38.
Wow.
37 or 38 when I first noticed grays in my beard. I still don't have many. I blame them on my partner. They're not mine naturally. But even I started to freak out, like, oh, wait a minute. Hey, that means I can't excuse myself from being, saying I'm younger than I am or something like that. But it's all nonsense. So I think I may become, Zaki, a silver fox and a bald eagle at some point. We'll see how that works.
Well, if Picard can baldly go, right. And so can Cicero.
There you go. I like it. And and we're back to Picard.
All right. Well, that's what I have for my episode, Chris. So do you want to take back over the podcast?
I mean, if you're willing to hand it off to me, then sure.
I will allow it.
I've actually really enjoyed stepping aside, so I'm going to love over the next couple of episodes where I get to kind of sit back and let you guys take the reins, because it's fun. It's fun. Because Paul Herman is apparently working on a podcast that I'm just going to be a co-host panelist for, but he's dragging his feet. So any chance I get to sort of sit in that role,
Does Paul listen to this?
Yeah.
No. He's not a Star Trek fan. Are you kidding me? I'll tell him that I mentioned him. Maybe he'll listen to it, but he'll probably not.
We are adding him right now.
Yeah. I'm still trying to turn him into a Star Trek fan. He's so obstinate about it. But very well done. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
I hope you had a good time.
It was acceptable.
All right. Well, fair enough. You heard it here first, guys. So Discovery Debrief is acceptable.
So hey, I've got a serious question about this episode that we haven't broached.
Yes.
For a second, Rachel, I will start with you. But first, I'll ask it of everyone. But Rachel, you will be able to answer first. Was anyone creeped out, or did anyone raise an eyebrow at Jean-Luc Picard, the adult steward, having a romantic dalliance with the much younger his good friend? I forgot what her name was.
Marta Batanides.
Yeah.
I'd seen this episode many times,
right,
and I never really thought of it until the podcast that I listened to called The Greatest Generation, which is like a comedy podcast about TNG, mentioned that it was super creepy. And it was super creepy that the actress who like played her she's actually like really young.
Right.
And that she had these like romantic scenes with Patrick Stewart, who was like 30 years older than her.
And now she's married to a 65-year-old.
Oh, well,
no, I have no idea.
I think not, right?
So yes, after it was pointed out, I did find it creepy. But
Chris, what did you think of that?
I mean, I think the creepiness might just come from on the set, because within the story, Q explains that he appears younger to everybody. But yeah, I mean, you take that part out of it. The reality of the situation is that you had an old man making out with a much younger woman. It's a little creepy, but at least it's Patrick Stewart. I mean, not that completely dismisses it or excuses it, I guess. But I'm sure that they made clear to her what the job entailed. At least I certainly hope they did.
Hey, by the way, you're going to have to kiss Patrick Stewart.
Yeah. Hey, who knows? Maybe she was really into the idea. Maybe. Hopefully she was. But yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see that there is a little bit of a creep factor in there, sure.
Right. Zaki, were you creeped out?
It's a little creepy. You just gotta. I mean, it is. I don't know how they what the workaround would have been. Right. Since they did like the quantum leap thing, right, where we're seeing old Picard. It's like other than just not having him. Like not showing them kiss, I guess, or because it does the thing where they like kiss and then it fades out or something.
Yeah.
Maybe just don't show that. Show them
going in for
the kiss, and then like
something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's in for a penny, in for a pound. You're kind of stuck.
Well, hey, I mean, at least the scene where he wakes up in the morning. She wasn't there. Instead, there was. There was
that would have been
LANCIE.
Instead, it was cute.
Right.
Closer in age. Actually, interestingly, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, they never kissed on screen.
Really?
Yeah, they always just lean into it, right. So it can be done.
Thing?
No, it was something about one of them didn't want to kiss on screen.
Right. They only kissed off screen, baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was definitely something for me. Again, as I've already said several times, that this was if it wasn't my first time watching it, it felt like it was my first time watching it. And while I was fully engaged and I was fully immersed within the episode, that moment where I was like, oh, okay, oh, Picard's about to change his stars. And, obviously had this will they, won't they relationship with his friend for that time. And that was, potentially the one that got away. Like, oh, he's actually going to change that. But then I was like, oh man, wait a minute. That's Patrick Stewart. That woman's like, she's like 20, like what's going on here? And then, it's like, it's Patrick Stewart. So like, yeah. But it was still definitely an eyebrow raised moment for me. And the only thing that I think would have changed that is if they had decided that they would have continued to use the actor that was young Picard throughout the entire episode, instead of just in moments where he was being murdered or at least impaled. But that would have, I think that would have greatly impacted the emotional resonance of the entire episode.
Sure. Yeah. I think that point is well taken.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing that I wanted to bring in, if that's okay, Rachel.
That's fine. I've already seeded the podcast back.
Well, I'm just making sure. A few years ago, I recorded what was at the time a pilot for a new podcast with a very good friend of mine who was one of my very first podcasting colleagues, a brilliant man from Australia named Bradley Lang, who was on the Modern Myth Media podcast with me for a number of years. And one of the subjects was going to be influential media for us. I chose this episode. Brad chose the novelization of Batman No Man's Land by Greg Rucka. And we both just kind of said what each work brings. So we also had the opportunity to comment on each other's work. And Brad's perspective to this day is one of the most unique ones I've encountered in regards to Tapestry, because his basic position, if I had to kind of try and boil it down, is that it was very American. And what he meant by that was, I'm paraphrasing our conversation because I can't remember the specifics, of course, but he basically said, look, he changed the course of his life. He had a real heart beating in his chest. He still had a job on the Federation flagship. Why wasn't that enough for him? It was overridingly American to him that the episode communicated that having that job and having a functional place within the quote unquote society of the crew of the Enterprise was not enough. And of course I tried to communicate to him, well, Jean-Luc Picard has never settled. And he's like, well, why is it settling? He was very firm in his position that the Americanness of Tapestry was not necessarily a universal constant across global culture. What do you guys make of that?
I like that perspective because I thought of it watching the episode. I've thought of it before. I've watched it and thought like, well, his like the crappy Picard, like his life is my life. Like I just like do experiments and then tell people about them. And like, I don't know. But I think that the thing that you have to think about is that the Jean-Luc Picard, that wasn't enough for him. The one that is, doing the viewing in whose frame of reference we are in. Right. That wasn't enough for him.
It was not the trajectory of the life that he knew.
Yeah. And so it's not necessarily that that life was inferior. It's just that if that one thing hadn't happened, he would be a totally different person with different desires and wants, and he would never have even wanted the things that he is crazy for. So like I don't think that it's like really shitting on that being just a scientist, but maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But because like I'm fine just doing experiments and telling people about them. That's like that's my ultimate. That's my captain's chair. But like I think it's more like the higher concept that the things that maybe you regret are the things that have actually made you who you are, and you would be different.
Right.
That's the higher concept. Sure. I think the value judgments are, coming from the frame of reference of Jean-Luc Picard, of Captain of the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah, sure. Zaki?
I think that it's the loss, right? It's kind of echoing what Rachel said. I mean, the Picard who's seeing where he's ended up, he has the ability to compare where he was, right? So I mean, it's not sure, you're on the Federation flagship and you're doing stuff, but you were the captain, you know what I mean? Like, how do you reconcile what you are with what you could have been? It's like getting a window into the alternate reality where you are either you have a much higher station or a much lower station, right? And knowing that exists couldn't help but alter your perspective of who you are at this moment.
Sure.
You'll either value more who you are or you'll aspire for more. But either way, I mean, getting a window into that. So now, again, it's in the Star Trek universe, there's a difference between being, Ensign Cito and being Captain Picard.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of it too, is that he was a neophyte. I think he characterizes himself as a general fan at best. Sure. Not that necessarily justifies the position. I'll have to take up the audio, but I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. I think you said it. I mean, it's the fact that he has the knowledge of who he was, right? And so how do you say, oh, I got what I wanted in the past, but now look where I am. It's not, he's in a dead end. He's in a career dead end. He's like late 40s, and he's he's being ordered around by Riker and Worf and stuff, Yeah.
And Geordi. So.
Right. Yeah.
Geordi should have been fired by now for what he did with Leah Braun.
We remember LeVar Burton might be listening to this show. Maybe. Yeah. We love you. We love you, LeVar Burton.
I was just talking about how great LeVar Burton is.
Yes, I know.
It's not his fault they wrote it like that.
No, I know. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, we have Cicero to thank for that possibility. But Cicero, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think Zaki said it well. It's the butterfly effect, right? And if you are in the Doc Brown, timeline shifting now, if we've got the line and where it deviates, if you're already on that line, it's okay. But if you were aware of the other line, the other alternate, the other reality, and now you're thrust into this new reality, and while you may have gotten what you wanted in the past, the fact that things are so dramatically different for you in the present is not something that it's easy to with which to reconcile.
Sure.
And we didn't get a long enough and big enough snapshot of what his new reality as was he an ensign or was he
lieutenant, junior?
It's like a lieutenant.
Yeah, junior lieutenant, right? The fact that he is approaching his twilight in his career, and that's where he got junior lieutenant. That just isn't good enough for who Jean-Luc Picard is. And fundamentally, still in his body, he knew that he was destined for command, and not only that he was destined for command, but that he was good at it.
Yeah.
And so him being a junior lieutenant was never going to be good enough for him. It wasn't ever going to satisfy him. We don't know if this relationship that he had with his friend, what was her name? Ensign Marta Badanides. Yeah, Badanides. Who, by the way, was 35 years his junior. The actor. But it's like we don't know if that bore fruit. Both literally and figuratively. So we don't know if maybe in his quarters, or maybe she was serving on the Enterprise somewhere. And they had a relationship, and maybe that would have changed things for him. We don't know that stuff, but what we do know is that a fundamental part of how he defines himself in the present day is as captain.
Yes.
And the fact that was not who he was, and the fact that he wasn't even close to being that, was enough for him to say, wait a minute, maybe I didn't make a mistake by being a brash asshole as a youth. Maybe that's who I needed to be in order to become the person that I was before I got shot in the chest.
Right.
And kind of like, and I'll talk about myself personally. There are things about myself as a youth that I look back at and say, man, this was a fundamental fork in the road for me. Mm-hmm. And at times I sit back and I think, oh man, how different my life would have been if I had chosen this thing. If I had decided to go to this school and study this thing like I had planned on doing, as opposed to going to this school and studying this other thing, like I wound up actually doing. Mm-hmm. And as I look at that, it makes you think about what you wouldn't get if you had not taken the path that you currently take. And the thing that I realized that I wouldn't have is my children.
Sure.
And immediately, and as Picard has defined himself as a captain, I have defined myself as a father. Mm-hmm. Like, before I am anything else, and the accomplishments that I am most proud of is the fact that I have two sons that can look at me and call me dad. And regrets I may have, but they are not. And I would not change a thing about my life if it meant that I wouldn't have them in it. So I think that's what Picard was able to see as a result of going to his new altered timeline, his altered reality, mm-hmm. And realize that it's not worth it. The love of an old friend was not worth losing what defined him as a human, what he was most proud of.
Beautifully said.
I think that if Loser Picard has kids, it like fundamentally changes the episode. Like, right. 100%. Because
absolutely.
That's like,
absolutely,
like, if you're not the starship captain, but you're like personally fulfilled.
Well, and we know that that's something that does weigh upon him.
Yeah, that would be like a crazy different sort of thing.
And I mean, we, to some extent, Generations gives us that, the who is Picard if he has a family.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I should dig up the audio of that conversation I had with Brad, because I'm sure that I came short in actually representing his full opinion, and it's never been released before. And I was actually pretty proud of that conversation. So maybe Discovery Debrief, maybe like a 0.1 episode would be the correct venue for at least that discussion. I'll have to talk to Brad about that because it's fun. And I think that our listeners might enjoy it quite a bit, especially because Brad is brilliant. He's not regularly podcasting anymore, which is a loss for podcasting in general. So any chance that I might have to inject him a little bit more, I will most likely take. Well, so that's going to wind down our discussion for Tapestry. Again, thank you to Rachael for leading the discussion. But we do have another episode to talk about whenever we reconvene, because our schedules are crazy. So Zaki,
yes, sir.
Your episode is up next. So if you could, First, guide us through the thought process that led you to ultimately settling on your choice, and clue us in on what that choice was.
Well, there wasn't much process to it, to be honest. You said name your favorite episode, and as quickly as it takes for a thought to form, I said The Visitor. Because I have adored this episode from the moment that it aired. I've been able to view it through the prism of a son reflecting on his father, and now a father reflecting on his children. It's just beautiful. It really is. Every single time I watch it, and I've seen it countless times, I cry at the end of it.
Yeah, you're gonna make me cry right now just describing it. Yeah.
It's there's a lot of reasons it works, and I think one of them is that the love between a parent and a child is not something that we really see expounded upon in the same way of romantic love, right. Mm-hmm. And what would a parent do for their child, and vice versa, right? We see that reflected in this, and then there's an added level of poignancy for me in that it's about Jake Sisko dealing with. Actually, let me reverse that. It's about Ben Sisko becoming the one thing he would never, ever want to be, and that's an absentee father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the weight of that, and carrying the burden of, I almost feel like I'm tapping into our, whatever the conversation will be that we have. But I mean, imagine that, you carry the burden of everything that your child is missing out on because of their obsession with you. I was talking to my wife recently, and I was talking about how, every parent has two fears. And, sister, I'm sure you can relate to this, right? One fear is, what if something happens to them? Right. But number two is, what if something happens to me before they're ready?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And, that's what this is, right? It's Jake at the moment when he needs his father the most. He loses him, and who does he become? And you carry that burden with you. It's a beautiful, really transcendent episode that Star Trek has never done anything quite like.
Yeah.
There are episodes that do the alternate timeline that we got to fix and then we wipe it out and whatever, but based around this idea, this central conceit. And I think it's a uniquely Deep Space Nine episode. And I think, whenever people say, "Oh, why do you like Deep Space Nine so much?" Because that's my favorite show after the original. And I say, watch The Visitor.
Yeah.
And you'll understand why.
Yeah. Wonderfully said. Yeah, it's very much a demo-worthy episode to anybody who doubts the greatness of Deep Space Nine. Absolutely. Well, definitely a lot to look forward to when we do reconvene to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine's The Visitor in episode 26 of Discovery Debrief. But as for right now, that is going to do it for episode 25 of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. So please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes, and be sure to join us as we convene next time to discuss Zaki's Choice in our continuing series of Debrief's favorite episodes. As always, though, until we meet again, please go boldly, my friends.